Roger has been already in IPA before. And meeting here 6 years ago. And Roger is one of the creators of the University of Delft in Paris, where he teaches still now. And he's a colleague of funds, also the only economist there. And he is, besides many work in direct economics, public economics, principal agent problems, and very extensive list I want to go over here. He also is very good applied economist. He works in the Council for Economic Advisor for the President of France, or for the Prime Minister, I should say. And he's been doing some work now on the Green House Act, and he's writing a report right now, so he's very good economist, as well as a full-fledged mathematical economist. We're very happy to have him here. He'll speak about a very fresh look about a very classical problem in economics, the factor price equalization theorem. And thank you very much for coming, Roger.
Thank you very much, Aloisio, and thank you at IMPA for inviting me. I am naturally extremely honored to be the only non-mathematician, if I understand well, to be invited to speak. But I am also a little bit nervous because I am not a mathematician. And so what I am presenting may not impress you mathematically, although part of what I'm presenting is a John paper with Ivar Eikeland, who is a mathematician. So now my purpose, in fact, will be to try to convince you that mathematics may be useful in economics, and to try to show you at which levels it may be useful. So I will start from an old problem in economics, which is called the factor price equalization problem, or the Heckscher-Ohlin problem. And I will try to show you how simple mathematics helps you to understand what's going on, and how more sophisticated mathematics may also help you better, in a sense. So what is the Heckscher-Ohlin problem? To present it, I'll present a quotation from Ohlin, who lived in the, so he wrote that in 1924, it's at the beginning of the 20th century, and this can set up the problem. Okay? The problem is underlying problem is what are the effects of international trade. So we say, consider Australia, that has a small population, abundant supply of land, not much of it is not very fertile, so land is consequently cheap and wages high. Okay. So he claims that it seems profitable to produce goods requiring areas of land, large area of land, but little labor. And for example, this is what happened with wool production. Okay, now you can take the case of a region endowed with technically trained labor and capital that will specialize in industrial production, so that export from one region to the other will on the whole consist of goods that are intensive in those factors with which this region is abundantly endowed, and the price of which are therefore low. Okay. In a nutshell, Australian land is thus exchanged for European labor. Okay. So trade brings you to exchange the factor in which you are, which is abundant for you, abundantly endowed, against other factors in other regions. Now, what are the effects on prices? Then if this is true, does trade increase the price of land in Australia and lowers it in Europe, while tending to keep wage down in Australia and up in Europe? The tendency, in other words, is to approach an equalization of the prices of productive factors. So this is a statement by Olin, okay, and that relates, it's called as, it's often related with Heckscher and Olin, in fact. Now, does that make sense? We can look at data and show you that something like this has happened. For example, this first sheet shows you that, it's only illustrative, it's only to show you that between the middle of the 19th century and the First World War, there has been a lot of increase in trade in the world. For example, if you compare the share of trade over GDP, export over GDP in a number of countries in 1913 and in 1973, you will see that it's not so much different. Okay. So there have been, in the 19th century, a lot of trade. My second picture is that shows you that this trade has led to some kind of equalization of commodity prices. Okay, there have been something like world prices for some commodities, in particular for agricultural commodities. For example, you have something here that shows you that the British price of wheat has tended to become smaller and smaller than the New York price of wheat. Okay, the difference is larger with Chicago. The same has occurred with meat, for example. You see here the meat price differential between the UK and the US. Naturally, the convergence is not complete. There have been huge difference until 1900, but after that it went down. Okay. So trade in the world in the 19th century has led to some equalization of the prices of commodities. So if Olin is right, it should have led to some equalization. The tendency of equalization of factor prices should have been effective. Okay. And in particular, Australian land is exchanged against the European labor. Then Australian land that was scarce and cheap should have seen its price increase. Indeed, what's happened, here you see that this picture shows you something that is called the real price of land. Okay, it's some price of land that takes into account inflation. So it's not, there are many statistical problems behind, but I suppose, and you see that the real price of land over the period from 1870 to 1910 has been multiplied by 5 in Australia and by 3 in the US. At the same time, it has decreased by more than 2 in the UK and stayed steady in other regions. I could show you France and Germany where it was somewhat steady. So naturally, this shows that something like the Olin effect or the Heckscher-Olin effect, factor price equalization, has been playing all over this period. Okay. Now, these are the facts, and naturally there are many controversies on that, to which extent I should also look at many other prices. Okay, I only try to illustrate where the problem comes from. Now, why is mathematics useful to understand that? So I will try to show you first what we call in economics the Heckscher-Olin model that try to provide some modeling of the question I was talking about. And the Heckscher-Olin model considers that you have 2 commodities and 2 factors. Okay, these 2 commodities might be wheat and it might be wool and industrialized product. The factors might be capital and land, for example, if we think about the 19th century. For the purpose of illustration, here I call these 2 factors, but it doesn't matter. Okay, I call these 2 factors unskilled labor and skilled labor. But so I take a model with 2 goods and 2 factors, and in this simple world in which you would have 2 goods and 2 factors, I will try to discuss some of the background issue behind this factor price equalization. So for that, let's look at the first picture. Okay, this picture so on the first axis, you have the quantity of the first factor. On the second axis, the quantity of the second factor. And here, the black line, I'm very bad at it, okay, is the isoquant of production of good 1. Okay, production of good 1 equal 1. That means if you combine these factors, all this combination of factors allow you to produce 1 unit of good 1. Okay, so there is some substitution possible between the factor. And here, you have the isoquant for the production of good 2. Now, if you have some wage vector, WU, WS here, and you minimize cost, so you produce 1 unit of good 2 at minimum cost, then you will choose this input bundle. If you minimize cost for the production of good 1, then you will choose this input bundle, V1 of W. And you see that there are several facts in this picture. First, this vector is flatter than this vector. Second one, this line crosses this line in the way shown on the diagram. And these things are obviously related. Okay, and on the diagram I have shown here, then we say that the production of good 1 is more intensive in commodity 1 than the production of good 2. Okay, and the production of good 2 is more intensive in commodity 1. That reflects this single crossing of isoquants. It's called the non-intensity reversal property. Okay, whether this is plausible is another story. Now, so again, I am trying to describe production in this simple world with 2 goods and 2 factors. Now, now we go to the dual in the sense we show the cost function. The cost function okay, yeah, seems to work sometime. Not always. Okay, the axis for the cost function at WU, WS, that means the wage of the first factor, the wage of the second factor, and the isoquants are the isoquant of cost of production of good 2 equal 1 for the red one, cost of production of good 1 equal 1. Okay, and surprisingly, this cost function inherits the single crossing property. So when you have non-intensity reversal in terms of the primal, then you have a single crossing in the dual for this cost function. Okay, so they cross like this, and the reason is obviously that this vector V2 of W is perpendicular here, and this vector V1 of W is perpendicular to the black curve. Okay. Now, this shows you the cost in this world as a function of the wages of the 2 factors. Now, from this diagram, you should see some of the well-known statements of international trade. For example, you have Stopler. You can see Stopler-Samuelson. Stopler-Samuelson tell you that if the price of good 1 increases, then the wage of, as I've called the unskilled labor here, increases, the wage of the skilled labor decreases. But furthermore, the purchasing power of the wage of the skilled labor increases. Okay, that corresponds, in fact, to, okay, it's easy to have a diagrammatical proof. Okay, the price of good 1 increases, that means you go from this curve to this curve. Then the new wage corresponds to this point F. Then you see that WU increases, WS increases, but the fact that if you take this, you see that WU over P1, which is here, also increases. Okay, so you have some other, so from that, in this simple world, you can understand a few things, like what happens when the price of one good increases, what happens when the price Okay, for example, you could see, so it's what you can do in this economy when you have a fixed quantity of both factors. Okay, so that's the aggregate production set. It looks like that. And for example, Rybczynski's theorems tell you that if you, real problem. Yeah, doesn't work. Okay, I cannot tell you what Rybczynski means because without a point here. Now, in this simple world, I have some ingredients for this factor price I have some argument for this factor price equalization story. In this simple world, when you have single crossing at least, and when you look at the with no factor intensity reversal, when you look at these curves, they have only one point of intersection. You take the price of good 1 equals something, the price of good 2 equals something. You look at the isocost curve, they have only one point of intersection. So that means if the price in this world, when you know the price of the goods, you know also the price of factors if you know the technology. Does it imply that if the two countries trade together, again in this very simple world, the price of factors will be equalized if the price of the good are equalized? Not necessarily. That might be something else. There might be specialization. One country must specialize in one of the good and the other country in the other of the good. But at the level of production, you have some factor price equalization at the level of production theory here. So this is to illustrate that this helps, okay, some mathematics helps you to formalize, okay, to try to describe a world that is certainly much simpler than the real world, but in which you can discuss some of the arguments, like the all-in argument. At least you can give some assumption under which it's true, some assumption you can understand much better than what is said in the pure literary argument. At least that's what economists do. But not only this is very, this is simple. Okay, this is simple mathematics. There is nothing complicated. And this is not general. We are in a very, very simplistic world. The question is there something robust in what we say from this simple model? I'll try to show, that's the second part, which is correspond to the paper. I'll try to discuss the same type of idea I have discussed, but in a rather general world. Okay, in this world, you will have a finite number of goods, and the good will be, you will distinguish between produced goods and non-reproducible factors. So you have you are in the Sherolin type of model. You have some factors, okay, land, skilled labor, unskilled labor, that are fixed, that are given, I mean, you consider, cannot be produced in the short run. And you have goods that can be produced from these factors. But goods can be produced not only from factors, as in the Sherolin model, but also from other goods. Okay, it's why it's said here, so you have goods, you have factors. So the notation is that a production plan, okay, is a vector z minus v that tells you the quantity of goods that are, for example, a global production plan tells you the quantity of goods that are available in the economy. Minus v means the quantity of factor counted negatively that have been provided. So that's a vector in RL plus k. A price vector will be a price for each of the good or each of the factors. So we can view that. So here is the basic assumption we make is that each good is produced from the other goods and the other factors. So we have a production function that to a commodity bundle, an input bundle and a factor bundle associate a quantity bundle. Okay, that's also, I could view that as a production set, that's a subset of now I can illustrate the type of production function that we have. Oh, I forgot to say, I will take, there are two restrictive assumptions. The first one is that each production process allows to produce only one good. Yeah, there is no joint production. Second one, we have constant return to scale. in the sense that if we double the input, if you double the input, you double the output. We have constant return to scale. Okay, these are these two assumptions. Now I show you, for example, what's the section of the production set when you have the quantity, you have two goods on one factor, the quantity of factor is fixed, then you can have, you can produce more good one by using more good two, that is counted negatively, yeah, like this. Now you can also substitute the factor on good two for producing good one. So I have as many production processes as there are goods. Each of these production processes is constant return to scale. It uses the other goods, and it uses the factors. Okay, and I am in a time static context. Okay, I don't want to put time. It will be slightly more complicated, although not basically different. And what I want to study in this context is what economists call the global production set. Formally, it's the sum in the sense of sum of set of the individual production set. Informally, it describes everything that can be obtained in the economy. That means the combination of factor bundle and commodity bundle that can be obtained in the economy. And in fact, what I'm interested is to look at this set, but in a sense, what we are looking at is this frontier. In fact, we are even looking at something more special, which is this non-specialized frontier. That means the frontier that corresponds to the fact that all goods are produced. And in fact, we are even more interested in this subset, which is a part of the production frontier in which you have a positive production of all goods. Okay? And we are also interested in that, the efficient frontier corresponding to the fact that you have a fixed bundle of factors, V bar, given a priori. Okay. And the question that I raise is the geometry of the production set, and also the geometry of its normal cone. And that we will come back to the factor price equalization theorem from there. We'll see that it relates very closely to that. Now, the geometry of the global production set, I will visualize it in the case where you have two goods and one factor. That's something that one factor is important because a lot of debate in economic theory has been made within frameworks in which you had only one factor, that was labor. So assume that you have one unit of labor, and what can you do? Okay. With one unit of labor, you can produce good two, from good one and the factor along this production curve. We can also produce good one from good two and the factor, and this is a transformation curve. But what you can do also is to allocate 50%. Okay, you can take this production plan, but allocate only 50% of the factor to each of the production process. And what you will get is a convex combination of points that are here. For example, if you take this, and you allocate 50% of the factor to each of the process, then you will get this price, this point in the middle, because that's a convex combination here. What is interesting is that this is a line, okay, this is bounded by a line. What you can do in the economy, in this simple economy, is really bounded by this line. And that's something that interested very much economists, because that relates with one of the big debates in economics. Where do prices come from? Do they come from demand, or do they come from supply? In this world, prices come only from supply, in the sense that if, in this world, if prices are equal to production costs, then they will be necessarily given by a vector perpendicular to this line. So it's a case in which prices are entirely determined by the condition of production, in a sense, at least, under some other condition. Okay. So that's a somewhat extreme case. If you want to clarify, okay, so that's the same picture, but that's a global production set that's in R3. So what I had was a section. Here I have the quantity of factor. That here I have 0 amount. Here I have 1 unit of factor. Okay, and you see that. I hope it's suggestive, but I'm not so sure. So what's happened in general is given by this statement called theorem, although I don't know whether it deserves to be called theorem, but economists like to call things theorems. Okay. It says that if you take an efficient production point corresponding to, which is on gamma plus plus of v, that means relates what is efficient given the fact that you have the vector v of factors, then it belongs to a single phase which has dimension L minus k. Okay, in particular, when k equal 1, it has dimension L minus 1, that's an hyperplane. For example, when L equal k plus 1, then it's a ruled surface. So this so I can visualize these two cases. The first one is really the one we had seen before. So if I have 3 goods, 1 factor, so what I can do when I have some fixed vector, a fixed amount of this factor is really here in terms of goods. If I have 3 goods on 2 factors, then what I can do, so here is the quantity of the 3 goods that are visualized along this axis. What I can do is something like that. But this surface is ruled like this, and it's developable. Okay. So we could have a lot of other applications. So, but from this, we understand better what we can do with this economy, in a sense. So that's the first part of the program I described. Now, in order to understand, we can try to understand the dual, okay, in the sense that the polar cone of the global production set, instead the set of prices, PW, that are supporting prices for the global production set, which is a convex set. Okay. For doing that, we look at the cost function, which is here. So the cost function tells you that when the price of the inputs is P minus L of the other good, the price of the factor is W, then you try to minimize the cost. So this means it's the inner product of the price vector by the quantity vector. It's the inner product of the price vector of factor by the quantity vector. And you try to minimize it subject to the fact that you want to produce 1 unit of the good. Okay. Then this gives you some cost minimizing bundle for the good that depends about the price of the good and the price of the factor. Some factor minimizing bundle, BL, when you produce good L, P minus LW. And this allows you to define a cost function, okay, that we had seen on the first, on the X-Sherolin slide, okay, we had this cost function. And the cost function tells you what is the minimum cost when the price vector for the good is P and the price vector for factor is W. Okay. And it's an equation of the form PL, the price of good L, is equal to the cost, a certain function of the set of the other price on the vector price. Repeat that. So in general, this is written in a more compact way. Okay, that's price vector. This is the price vector multiplied by the matrix of input bundle that are the cost minimizing input bundles. That's the vector of the factor price vector multiplied by the input matrix of factor bundle. And can be written by P prime I minus A of Q equal W prime B of Q. And you see that you have this matrix I minus A of Q, and the question is whether it can be inverted. And this question was apparently raised by economists before it was solved in the mathematical literature. For example, Michio Mirishima claims that Marx understood in some special cases what was called the Perron-Frobenius theorem that tells you that you can invert this matrix when this is a positive matrix, okay, when its eigenvalue is smaller than 1, okay, which happens here under very realistic, when we say that this matrix is productive, okay, when it's so it's a curiosity, but I think that the fact of inverting this matrix was the question that interested economics before it was solved by a mathematician. And in fact, I think 2 years after I don't know which version of the theorem was published, but in 1911, there was a French mathematician called l'Abbé Potron, who was a priest of the Company of Jesus, and was a former student of École Polytechnique, who wrote a paper in economics on the application of the Perron-Frobenius theorem on the standard of living of workers and how to improve social welfare. Okay, so it was a parenthesis on that. So now this equation can be derived, in fact. In fact, it's that because at the envelope theorem. So in fact, just the point is that this function, locally, P is a function of W. When you have PW that is associated with your hyperplane, that is a price vector supporting the tangent hyperplane, then if you modify slightly W, you modify slightly P, and you find another supporting hyperplane. Okay, so that's slightly better. I'll give you also, for the sake of curiosity, one. When you look at this matrix inequality, then you can rewrite it by putting I minus A minus 1 equal I plus A squared plus N squared. And then you have a very nice interpretation, because this tells you that in this world, the price of commodity L equals the sum of the price of factors, so the price of factor K, multiplied by the direct quantity of K required for producing L. For producing L, you need some direct quantity of factor K, but you need also some quantity of factor K that is indirectly required for producing the input required for producing commodity L. And you are also going further away, the quantity of factor K that is indirectly required for producing the quantity of input that are required for producing the input needed for producing the input also. So that's really the total quantity, direct or indirect, of the factors that are required for producing the good. And one special case of this formula, also it's well known in economics, is the labor theory of value, okay, that tells you that the price of a good, when you have only one factor, is equal to the sum of the quantity of labor that has directly or indirectly required for producing the good. Now I'll come maybe. How long do I have? Maybe I finished, no? How long do you have still? 15 minutes. Oh, 15. I don't need 15 minutes, probably. But I'd like to know. No, I will give you what's. Now I'll come back to the paper I was commenting. So one of our results is the following, is that take the set of Q equal PW, that Q is a supporting hyperplane, to some phase of my global production set, the efficient part of the global production set. Then we have seen that locally, if you find some Q0 equal P0 W0, then locally there is a map phi W such that all the points phi of W are defined supporting hyperplanes to the global production set. And in fact, one first theorem that we have here is that this map is this parametrization is global in the sense that all the supporting hyperplanes have the form W, phi of W, at least under the assumption we make, that some boundary assumption that makes the problem simpler, they are necessarily of this kind. Okay. And you may not be especially interested with this theorem, but we like it because as a corollary, when we apply it when the number of factors equals the number of goods, we find something more general than what exists in the literature in the Gale-Nikaido tradition, in the sense that what economists have studied is really the case where you have goods are produced only from factors, and there are the same number of goods as the number of factors. Okay, it starts from Gale-Nikaido. And so what they have found is a generalization of the non-intensity reversal, okay, by putting conditions on the matrix of the input-output matrix, which are squared input-output matrix. So they have found generalization of the non-reversal intensity idea, that, in the sense that under these conditions, the price of good determines the price of factor. Okay. When we apply this to the case L equal K, we find something that is which is as general as the most general theorem in this literature, which was written by Mascolel, in fact. So it's why we like it. Now, our second, so you said, you say we are very far from factor price equalization theorem. No, we are coming back. Okay. We are coming back because now we understand, in a more general world, the connection between factor prices and the price of commodities, in a sense. It's what we have done has allowed us to do. In particular, we have a mapping W. Okay, so we normalize it in some way. That's purely technical. And then we will using some version of Whitney's theorem, I think it's Whitney's, okay. We can prove the following. If you have twice more goods than factor, at least, then generically, good prices determine factor prices. Okay. That means if you have twice more goods than factors, if you take a vector price, you take the price of the goods, then you know the price of factors. Okay. If you cannot have different price of factor for this given vector of the prices of the good. So that's a generalization of the factor price equalization theorem, because what the factor price equalization theorem, as a theorem in production, as we do here, says is really when you have the price of goods, you have the price of factor. And that's true generically. In that sense, it might be wrong for, we play on the production set. Okay, we allow ourselves to change them slightly. But only when L is between K and 2K, you have weaker genericity theorem, in the sense that you have a dimension for the set in which the price of the good and the price does not determine the price of factor. So that's, I think that's I'll try to starting from this, maybe I can give you, to finish, I don't think it makes sense to give you the sketch of the proof, although I could do it, but so I suppose this is an application of standard transversality theorem. I suppose you are not much interested, but I will try to give you to come back to the intuition within the X-Sherolin model, in the case where you have two goods and two factors. Why is this true, and why do we find that? So in the X-Sherolin model, with no intensity reversal, you have the iso-cost at only one intersection. So the price of the good determines the price of factor. Finished. Now, it's not true in general. For example, in general, you might have that. Here are the iso-cost. Okay. And they have 2 points of intersection. So when you have the price of the good, there might be different price for the factors. And you see, for example, here when the price of the red good, I don't know whether it's 1 or 2, decreases, then you see that if you follow here if you go along here, if you increase the wage W1, okay, along this line here, you will go here. So that means that the price of the red good will decrease. So when you the price decreases and then increases. Okay, it will be non-monotonic as a function of W1 here. The price, the green price being fixed, the red price, when you increase W1, so you stay on this line, will decrease and then increase. Okay. So that's the picture. So in the first case, no intensity reversal. You have this W1 as a function, P2 as a function of W1. So I don't. You have something like this, which is a monotonic curve. In the other case, you have this, which is non-monotonic. And now we are in the, you will understand easily why we need this 2K. At least it's what slightly wrong, because if we put here the factor price parameter and then the price of the goods, then in fact it should come back here, not go this way. So this is correspond to another stuff. But if you put that on the line, okay, the previous diagram, when you have one price, one factor price, you have something like that. Now, if you increase the dimension, of the space of goods, for example, you have always one factor price, two factors, but two prices, three goods. Okay. Due to normalization, you have one price less and one factor price less. So you will have something like this. The set of PW will be one-dimensional, so it will be something like this. But that's why it might have self-intersection. So if you want to avoid that, that's why you have to have four goods and two factors. In that sense, this curve is in R3, and then it has no self-intersection generically. Okay, that's well known from mathematicians, obviously, but that's what I explained to economists, because they find that very strange. Okay, so I think I have mainly finished. I have tried to illustrate how mathematics can help economists. First, for doing very simple things, then for doing things for trying to obtain more robust results from this simple thing. There are all other uses of mathematics, in fact. Some people use mathematics to search for new ideas. Okay. Sometimes the mathematics we need exists, they are very simple. Sometimes they do not exist, so we ask mathematicians to. So I hope that this convinced you that using mathematics was helpful for economists. Actually, it does not solve our problems in a deep sense. Okay? It's not because we understand entirely this that we can give an advice to the government on international trade. Okay? The issue that we face in the real world are always more complex than the issue we face in simple models. But at least it allows to kill many wrong ideas and to look for tracks that are much better than the one you will choose without understanding well what's going on. At least that's what I tend to believe. Thank you.
Questions? No, thank you.
In this two goods, two factor case, you have the single crossing condition in order to have the price equalization theorem. If you diminish because you have